That was the first sign something was wrong, not the alarms, not the shouting. In the corridor outside my office, the coffee, I had set it down 2 minutes ago, fresh from the machine, and when I reached for it again, it had gone. Completely cold, like the heat had been pulled out of the room all at once. Then every screen in the building turned white. I work on the 14th floor of the United Nations Liaison Building in Geneva. My name is Yara Osei. My job title is Senior Xenolinguistic Analyst, which is a very long way of saying I translate things that do not want to be translated. I have been doing this for 11 years. I have handled transmissions from deep space probes, anomalous radio signals, and one very embarrassing incident involving a misread comet signature that nearly caused 3 governments to declare a state of emergency. Nothing had prepared me for 3:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, when every screen on Earth turned white and a sound filled the air that had no business coming out of any speaker ever built by human hands. It was not loud, that was the strange part. It was the opposite of loud. It was the kind of sound that made your ears feel like they were being politely asked to stop working, a low harmonic hum that sat somewhere between a frequency you could hear and a frequency you could only feel in your back teeth. And then the text appeared. Every screen, every device, every television, laptop, phone, billboard, and apparently, according to report filed 40 minutes later, a gas station FM radio display in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The same words, every language on Earth. Simultaneously. Species designation, human threat. Classification, Tier 1, you have 30 days to surrender governance of your world or face correction. I read it 4 times. Then I finished my cold coffee because there was nothing else immediately useful to do. The corridor outside my office had become a very expensive panic. People I recognized from years of quiet professional interactions were now doing things I had never seen them do. A senior attaché from the French delegation was standing completely still in the middle of the hallway, holding a pen in one hand and his phone in the other, looking at neither. A security officer was walking very fast in a small circle. Someone I did not recognize was sitting on the floor against the wall, knees up, staring at the ceiling. I stepped over the person on the floor. Not unkindly. My colleague Owen Bradley caught me at the stairwell. Owen is 6 ft tall, broad-shouldered, and normally the calmest person in any room. He had the look of a man whose calm had been informed that it was taking the rest of the day off. Yara, he said, tell me you're seeing this. I'm seeing it. Tell me it means something other than what it says. I thought about that for a moment. I had been translating things for 11 years. I knew the difference between a message with hidden meaning and a message that meant exactly what it said. Some communications are built to obscure. Some are built to land. This one had landed. It means exactly what it says, I told him. He made a sound I had never heard a grown professional man make before. I did not hold it against him. The Situation Room 2 floors down was already full. Generals I had seen only in briefing documents sat around the long table, alongside diplomats I had worked with. For a decade, there were people on screens patched in from Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Nairobi, and 4 other cities. Everyone was talking at the same time, and no one was listening to Anyone? I found a chair near the wall, not at the table. I sat down and I watched. I have a habit of doing this, watching. First, rooms tell you things when you stop trying to participate in them. This room was telling me it was frightened. And that frightened people in positions of authority have a very specific way of responding to things they cannot control. They generate noise, they call for reports, they form subcommittees. They mistake movement for action. The room was doing all of those things at once. General Philip Hart, who ran the UN's Emergency Coordination Division, was trying to impose order. He had a voice built for imposition. It was not working. We need a translation team on the full transmission. We need. The translation is complete, someone said. It's in 47 languages. It translated itself. A brief silence. Then we need to verify. 12 independent linguistic teams across 4 continents verified it in the first 18 minutes. The text is consistent. Across all languages, there are no alternate interpretations. Another silence, longer this time. I watched Philip Hart absorb that. I watched him look for a door in the information and find that there was none. Then what are we dealing with? He said. It was not quite a question. Someone started talking about possible satellite interference. Someone else mentioned a coordinated cyber attack. Third voice raised the possibility that this was some kind of elaborate psychological operation by an unnamed state actor. I looked down at my notepad paper. I always use paper in rooms like this because screens feel like they belong to whoever is broadcasting on them, and paper still belongs to me. I wrote one word. No. Not as a response to the room, not as a formal position or a diplomatic stance. Just the first word that had come when I read the transmission for the first time and felt the shape of it. I knew this shape not from space, not from science, fiction films or theoretical xenolinguistics papers. I knew it from smaller rooms, smaller stakes, the same basic structure. Someone with more power than you, speaking in the language of reason and order, telling you that your existence, as you have chosen to live it, is the problem, telling you that the solution is to hand over the part of yourself that makes the decisions, telling you this is for your benefit, that it will be peaceful, that it is already decided, and you should cooperate with what is inevitable. I was 12 years old the first time I heard that logic applied to people I loved. I did not go back to that thought. I rarely do. There is nothing useful waiting for me there in the middle of a crisis. I looked up at the room still churning. Around the table, 47 languages, self-translated, every screen on Earth. At once a 30-day deadline. Whoever had sent this message did not doubt that it would be obeyed, that certainty was built into the structure of the transmission the same way a landlord builds certainty into an eviction notice. The assumption of compliance was the foundation the whole thing rested on. I looked back down at my notepad. I had written one word. I thought for a moment about whether I wanted to write a second one. Owen appeared at my shoulder. He had gotten himself a coffee from somewhere and looked slightly more like himself. "You're very calm," he said. "I'm processing." "What are you processing?" I looked at the word on my notepad. Then I wrote the second word underneath it. He leaned over and read both words. "Yara," he said carefully, "that is not a diplomatic position. Not yet, I said. He straightened up and looked at the room. The noise had not decreased. If anything, it had acquired new layers. Someone had a phone pressed to each ear. Someone else was arguing with a screen that had gone dark. Do you think anyone out there knows we got this? Owen asked. He meant out. They're the way people mean it at 3:00 in the morning when the world has just changed shape, the billions of out. There's the kitchens and the apartments, and the overnight shifts and the hospitals. Everyone got it, I said, the same time we did. He was quiet for a moment. How do you think they're taking it? I thought about that gas station FM radio in Tulsa. I thought about every screen everywhere. 8 billion people reading the same words at the same moment, each one alone with it first before they turned to whoever was nearest. Badly, I said, and then interestingly, Philip Hart had finally achieved a version of quiet in the room. He was standing at the head of the table with the expression of a man who had accepted that the night was not going to improve and had decided to meet it standing. We have 30 days, he said. We do not yet know who sent this, what their capabilities are, or what they mean by correction. What we do know is that this transmission reached every communications device on the planet simultaneously, which tells us something about what we are dealing with. The room sat with that. We begin information gathering at 400. We reach out to every space agency, every deep field observatory, every general. My voice, I had not planned to speak yet. Every head in the room turned. There will be time for information gathering, I said, but I'd suggest we also begin thinking about what we intend to say. Beck, a senior diplomat across the table, looked at me with a careful expression of someone choosing their words. Dr. O's, we don't yet have enough information to formulate any kind of. We have 30 days, I said, and whoever sent this has already decided what the answer will be. That assumption is built into the message itself. The deadline is not an invitation to negotiate. It is a countdown to compliance. Silence. So the first thing we need to decide, I said, is whether we intend to comply. The room did not answer that, but I already had. I looked down at my notepad. 2 words. Simple, not diplomatic, not strategic. True. I folded the paper in half and put it in my pocket. Outside the windows, Geneva was lit up from end to end. Every building, every street light doubling in the water of the lake below. 8 billion people awake all at once, reading the same words in their own languages, and every single one of them in their own way, in their own kitchen or car or quiet dark room, was coming to their own conclusion. I thought for just a second about what that looked like from far away. All those lights, all that noise, all that impossible, exhausting, infuriating refusal to simply be quiet and manageable. I allowed myself one small private feeling about that. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and went to find better coffee. There was work to do. The work did not arrive in a ship. That was the first thing that unsettled me, and I am not easy to unsettle. I had spent the 2 weeks since the transmission building models of first contact, scenarios, physical vessel, orbital approach, ground level emissary. I had prepared for all of them. I had prepared linguistic frameworks, protocol documents, 17 separate opening statements in 17 separate registers From formal diplomatic to carefully neutral. None of that preparation covered what actually happened, which was that at precisely 9:00 in the morning on day 15, the conference room reserved for first contact at the UN compound in Geneva simply had someone in it who had not been there a moment before. Not something, someone, or something that had chosen to appear as someone. The Verk looked like light that had taken a meeting and decided to stay for the full hour. Tall, still, a quality of presence that made the air around it feel like it was paying closer attention than usual. It had a face the way a formal portrait has a face, structured, composed, not quite warm and not quite cold, but somewhere that had never needed to be either. I was in the room before it arrived. I had been in the room for 40 minutes, reviewing my notes and telling myself I was not nervous, which was only partially true. Owen was behind me, 2 steps back in the role of silent support that he is very good at. General Hart stood near the door. 3 other officials whose names I will not use because they asked me not to were arranged around the table. When the Verk appeared, no one moved for a full 3 seconds. Then Philip Hart, to his credit, cleared his throat. "Welcome," he said. "We are the representatives of the United Nations of Earth. I know what you are," the Verk said. Its voice was not translated. It spoke in clean, precise English with an accent that belonged to nowhere on this planet, like a language that had been assembled from a complete study of how English worked rather than from having grown up inside it. "I am here as a voice of the Galactic Council," it said. "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to explain as a courtesy what the Council has determined and why. I had been told before the meeting that I was to observe and not to speak unless directly addressed. This instruction had come from several levels above me simultaneously, which usually means everyone is equally uncertain who is actually in charge. I sat down. I placed my notepad in front of me. I put one pen on top of it, parallel to the edge of the table. "Please," said one of the unnamed officials, "we would like to understand the Council's position." The Verk sat down. The motion was precise, not robotic, more like someone who had learned to sit by watching a great many beings sit and had chosen the most efficient version. "The Galactic Council," it began, "has maintained order across 4,000 sentient species for 60,000 of your years. In that time we have encountered species at many stages of development. We have a model. It is accurate. Your species fits a particular profile within that model." "What profile?" I asked. Heads turned. I had not been authorized to speak first. I found I could live with that. The Verk looked at me, or oriented toward me. The distinction felt meaningful, but I could not explain why. "Tier 1 threat classification," it said. "Sentient species with advanced tool use, exponential technological development, and demonstrated inability to self-regulate. Historically, species in this category present a danger not only to themselves, but to neighboring systems within a relatively short developmental window." "How short?" Owen asked from behind me. Apparently, we were both ignoring the instructions. "By your time scale, between 1 and 300 years. Philip Hart leaned forward. "And what does the Council do with Tier 1 species?" "We offer integration," the Verk said. "Your governance is transferred to the Council's administrative framework. Your Population continues, your culture continues within managed parameters. Your development continues at a pace determined to minimize systemic risk. It paused. In exchange, you receive access to technologies several thousand years beyond your current level. You receive protection from the 14 other spacefaring civilizations who are, at this moment, watching this planet with considerable interest. You receive stability, the kind your species has never successfully produced for itself. There was a silence in the room that had weight to it. Because the offer was not terrible, that was the thing I had been dreading. I had hoped privately that the Council's proposition would be something easy to refuse, hostile, arrogant, dismissive. Something that would make the answer obvious. Instead, it was sitting across the table from us like a very well-reasoned argument, and the numbers behind it were difficult to dispute. The unnamed officials were exchanging glances. Philip Hart's face had gone carefully neutral in the way of someone doing hard math behind a composed expression. I straightened my pen. You mentioned 47 species, I said. The Verk turned its attention to me fully this time. Something about that attention made the back of my neck feel like I was being read rather than looked at. Our record indicates 47 successful integration processes, it confirmed. Successful, I said. Peaceful, stable, all 47 integrated species continue to exist in good condition. I straightened my pen again. It was already straight. Do they still make decisions? I asked. The integrated species about their own lives, their own directions, do they still choose? They choose within appropriate parameters, the Verk said, as a child makes choices within the structure family provides. It is not absence of choice, it is guided choice. The pen was straight. I left it alone. How long does the integration last? One of the unnamed officials asked. Is there a point where a species regains full autonomy? When the risk profile is no longer tier 1. And how long does that typically take? The Verk was quiet for just a fraction longer than it had been quiet before any other answer. For species in your classification, it said, it has not yet occurred. Another weight landed in the room. 60,000 years of management, 47 civilizations, none of them had come out the other side. I looked at the Verk, composed, patient, ancient. It had done this 47 times, and each time it had worked because what it was offering was genuinely better than what was being given up by any short-term measurement you cared to apply. Your species, it said, looking at me. And I noticed it was looking at me directly now, not at the generals or the diplomats, is uniquely resistant to this process, more so than others at this stage. We have noted it in our assessment. The resistance is itself considered a risk indicator. Because we don't agree easily, I said. Because you do not agree at all, it said. 400 active governance structures, 200 ongoing conflicts, an inability to coordinate even your most basic shared resources. You are ungovernable, Dr. Osai, by your own species standards, let alone ours. The room was very quiet. I thought about a word I had not used in my own mind for a very long time, a word applied to a place I had come from, applied to people I had known, used by people above them to justify doing things that were very logical and very clean, and took something out of the world that had no logical value and could not be put back. I did not look at the pen. Tell me something, I said. Yes. When you went to the other 47 species, before the integration, did you ask them what they wanted? The Verx was still. We assessed what they needed, it said. That is not what I asked. A pause, the longest pause yet. We presented the offer, it said, carefully, as we are presenting it to you. And they accepted. They recognized the logic of acceptance. I looked at it, it looked at me. Somewhere in that exchange, something was communicated that neither of us put into words, and I think we both knew exactly what it was. What did they want, I said, not what did they need, not what was logical. What did they want? Silence. We did not ask, the Verx said. Philip Hart looked at me, Owen looked at me, the unnamed officials looked at each other. I looked at my notepad. I did not write anything, but I thought about the word already written there. Folded in my pocket, the first word, the one I had written at 3:47 in the morning, when the coffee went cold and the screens turned white. The Verx stood. The motion was as precise as when it had sat. You have 15 days remaining, it said. I will return for your answer. I recommend you speak with your global leadership in the remaining time and help them understand what is being offered. It looked at me one final time. The council expects compliance, Dr. Osai, we always have. And then it was gone, not dramatically, not with light or sound. The room simply had one fewer person in it, the way a room does when someone leaves and closes the door quietly behind them, except there was no door and there had been no sound. The room sat in the silence it left behind. Philip Hart was the first to speak. We need to convene the full security council, he said, today. People began moving. Screens came to life. The machinery of response, large and slow and grinding, began to turn. I sat still. I thought about 47 civilizations that still existed, that were peaceful, that were stable, that had between them not produced anything recognizably new in 60,000 years of managed existence. I thought about the gas station radio in Tulsa. I reached into my pocket and touched the folded paper. I did not take it out. I looked at the empty space across the table where the Verx had been sitting, and I thought about what it would mean to be managed by something that had never once thought to ask what you wanted. I thought about what it would mean for every argument, every bad decision, every magnificent, wasteful, loud, inconvenient choice that 8 billion people made every single day to simply stop. And I felt something arrive in me, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and certain and old. I stood up, straightened my jacket. 15 days, I said to no one in particular. Owen appeared at my side. What do we do? He asked. I picked up my pen and my notepad. We find out, I said, what 8 billion people want. The first thing I expected was collapse. I want to be honest about that. I have worked in international diplomacy for 11 years. Before that, I watched institutions respond to crisis my entire childhood. I know what large groups of people do when they are frightened and the stakes are real and the clock is running. I have a model for it. It is not a kind model. My model said, wealthy nations negotiate private terms. Powerful blocs agree to sacrifice smaller ones in exchange for favorable integration conditions. The People with the least leverage get offered up first, dressed in the language of what is practical and what is realistic and what is, when all things are considered, the best outcome for the majority. I have seen this model operate on a small scale. I have seen it operate on a medium scale. I had every reason to believe I was about to watch it operate on the largest scale in the history of the species. I was wrong. Not immediately. The first 72 hours after the Verks visit were exactly what I expected. The Security Council held emergency sessions. Several powerful nations began quiet bilateral communications that they officially denied were happening. 2 major economic blocs issued statements that were so carefully worded as to contain no actual meaning, which is usually a sign that private negotiations are already underway. I sat in rooms and watched and took notes and said very little and waited for the familiar shape of surrender to show itself. On day 3, the African Union spoke. No private communications, no carefully worded statement, a direct vote. Broadcast live, attended by 54 member nations who had gathered in Addis Ababa. In less than 48 hours, the vote was unanimous. No. Not a conditional no, not a no pending further negotiation, a clean, simple, declarative no, delivered in a joint statement that was 7 sentences long and did not contain a single diplomatic softening. The final sentence read, "We have been told before that we are ungovernable. We consider this a point of pride." I read that statement sitting at my desk at 2:00 in the morning, and I held very still for a moment. Then the next thing happened. 3 nations in active military conflict with each other, 2 of which had been exchanging fire as recently as the week before the transmission, issued a joint statement. I read it 3 times because I could not at first process what it was. The statement formally announced the suspension of all hostilities, effective immediately, pending resolution of what they called the external governance matter. There was a footnote, an actual footnote, in a formal diplomatic document signed by 3 governments who were actively at war. The footnote said they reserved the right to resume their dispute once the current situation was resolved, at a time and manner to be determined by the parties involved. Owen read it over my shoulder. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "They're pausing a war," he said, "to deal with someone trying to tell them they can't have the war," I said. He thought about that. "That is extremely human," he said. "Yes," I said, "it is." The next 72 hours produced things I had no framework for. The internet, which I had half expected to dissolve into pure noise, did dissolve into pure noise, but out of the noise things kept surfacing. Philosopher in Istanbul published a 12-page argument for refusal that was translated into 30 languages within 6 hours. A marine biologist in New Zealand wrote a single paragraph that circulated so widely it was printed on signs and held up in streets across 4 continents. It began, "We are not asking for permission to be imperfect. We are asserting the right to remain in charge of our own imperfection." A group of engineers in 3 countries who had never met in person began collaborating openly on a document they called a counter-proposal. It had no official standing, no government had asked for it. They published every draft publicly, accepted amendments from anyone who wanted to submit them, and within a week had received contributions from people in 60 countries, including a livestock farmer in Iceland who turned out to have very strong opinions about sovereignty. That translated somehow into the document's most elegant section. A petition appeared. The language was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. We would like to keep our planet. Please, that was the entire text. It was signed by 600 million people in 9 days. I pinned a printout of it to the wall of my office, which I had begun covering with paper, printouts of statements, responses, op-eds, street signs, photographed and sent in from every corner of the planet. Owen came in on the 4th day, looked at the wall, and said nothing for a long moment. You're building something, he said. I'm reading, I said. You're reading all of it. Someone should. He looked at the wall for another moment. What are you seeing? I looked at it too. The noise and the argument and the shouting and the bad takes and the brilliant ones and the flags and the fists and the quiet letters and the loud declarations, all of it pinned up and overlapping and contradicting each other in 17 directions. I'm seeing people who have not been asked what they want, I said, discovering that they have very strong opinions about it. I had expected by day 10 to see the coalition begin to fracture. Some nation or bloc finally calculating that a private deal was better than collective resistance. Someone breaking first because someone always breaks first. It did not happen the way I expected. There were deals. I would be dishonest if I said there were not. 3 smaller nations entered into quiet discussions with council intermediaries about possible conditional arrangements, but something strange kept occurring each time a potential defection became known, which it always did because nothing stays quiet on a planet of 8 billion people who have mobile phones. The response was not acceptance. The response was an eruption, not just from the obvious places, from neighbors, from allies, from people who had no practical stake in the defection, but who treated it as a personal offense. A small island nation issued a statement so direct it was almost impolite. Coalition of civil society organizations published the private communications of one negotiating party, which they had obtained through means I decided not to examine too closely, and the resulting response made the negotiations impossible to continue. The planet was not agreeing. It was loudly, aggressively, comprehensively refusing to disagree in the direction of surrender. There is a difference. I want to be precise about it. Agreement would have been a unified position, a clean consensus, a single voice. We did not have that. We would never have that. 8 billion people are physically incapable of it. What we had instead was something stranger and harder to categorize. Shared floor, a line below which it turned out no one was willing to go, no matter how logical the argument for going there was. Nobody wanted to be managed. That was it. Under all the noise and the politics and the power calculations, that was the thing, not a grand principle, not an ideological stance, just a very basic, very stubborn refusal to hand the decisions to someone else. I found on day 12, in my morning review of incoming communications, a statement from a small nation that I will not name, because its situation is complicated and its government had asked for discretion. The statement was 4 sentences long. It had not been issued through official channels. It had been written by a government minister and passed informally to the UN liaison office, and it ended up on my desk because no one was sure what category to put it in. It said, "We have been told we were ungovernable before. We were told it by people with maps and guns and the logic of history on their side. They managed us very thoroughly. We do not exist in the form they left us in, but we exist." 4 sentences. I read them 4 times. I took the printout from the pile on my desk. I folded it once. I put it in my pocket. On day 13, the Security Council convened to vote on a resolution brought forward by 3 member nations. The resolution called for formal acceptance of the Council's integration offer on the grounds that rejection carried risks that no responsible government could justify accepting on behalf of its population. The argument was sound. Risk calculation was honest. The 3 nations who brought it were not acting in bad faith. I was asked to testify. I had 30 minutes to prepare. I spent 20 of them sitting at my desk looking at my paper wall. Then I picked up my pen and my notepad, and I walked into the chamber. The chamber was full. Screens on 3 walls carried feeds from capitals around the world. The Verk was present on 1 screen observing. It did not speak. It watched. Philip Hart introduced me. I sat down at the long table. I put my notepad in front of me and my pen on top of it. The lead delegate from the resolution sponsoring nations made the case. It was thorough. It was well-reasoned. It referenced survival rates and developmental timelines and the 47 integrated species who continued to exist stable and peaceful and provided for. Then it was my turn. I looked at the room. I touched my pocket where the folded paper was. I did not take it out. "You are right," I said. The room did not expect that. I could feel it recalibrate. "The risk calculation is accurate," I continued. "We are exactly as dangerous as the assessment says, exactly as disorganized, exactly as prone to exactly the kind of behavior that a rational, long-lived civilization would look at and classify as a threat." I paused. "And the Verk's offer is genuinely good. Better resources, better technology, protection from 14 other civilizations who are apparently watching us right now, with, and I quote, considerable interest, stability that we have never managed to produce for ourselves. These are real things. I'm not going to pretend they are not." Philip Hart was watching me carefully. Owen at the back of the room was very still. "What I am going to say," I said, "is something that is harder to put in a risk model." I looked at the screen where the Verk was watching. The Council has integrated 47 civilizations peacefully, successfully. Not one of those civilizations has moved out of managed status in 60,000 years. Not because they have not become less dangerous, because once something is managed, it stops generating the kind of unpredictable development that would change its classification. A delegate across the table started to respond. I kept speaking. "Every piece of medicine we have that works, every structure that held when it should have fallen, every problem we solved that we were told was unsolvable. All of it came from the noise, from the arguing, from the 17 different approaches pursued simultaneously by people who did not agree and would not stop. That is not a bug in the human System, that is the human system. I looked down at the table. I touched my pocket. I said quietly, so that the room had to stop its murmuring to hear me, I came from a place that was called ungovernable. They managed it, it was peaceful. I grew up in what was left afterward, and I want to be very precise when I say that what was left was not the same thing. It was quieter, and it was not the same thing. No one spoke. The 47 integrated species still exist. I said, I believe that. I believe they are stable and peaceful and provided for. I also believe that they are not what they were, and I do not think any of us in this room have the right to make that choice for 8 billion people who have just spent 2 weeks telling us loudly and clearly and in every language on this planet that they do not want to be managed. I picked up my pen. I put it down. Vote however your conscience directs you, I said, but know that the question is not whether the offer is good. The question is whether we believe that someone else knowing better than us is a sufficient reason to stop being us. I sat back. The vote was taken. The resolution failed by 2 votes. On the morning of day 30, I wore my best jacket, not for ceremony, not for the cameras, though there were cameras everywhere by then. I wore it because it was my grandmother's color, a deep green that, she said, made you look like you had decided something, and I wanted to feel that I had decided something, which I had. The response chamber was the largest room in the UN compound. It had been chosen because the transmission would go out on every channel, every screen, every frequency. The same way the council's message had arrived, our answer would depart. Philip Hart had insisted on symmetry. I had agreed with him, which does not happen often. I had written the official response, 6 drafts over 15 days, refined with input from 17 governments, 3 linguistic review boards, and Owen, who had a very good eye for when something sounded more frightened than it was meant to. The final draft was precise. It was legally sound. It formally invoked principles of self-determination under the emerging framework of xenopolitical rights that our legal team had built from nothing in under 3 weeks, which was honestly one of the more impressive things I had ever watched happen. It was, as diplomatic documents go, excellent. It was not the document that was going to be read. I did not know that yet. At 8:00 in the morning, with 2 hours until broadcast, I arrived at the chamber to find Owen standing outside the door with the expression of a man preparing to deliver complicated news to someone he respects. There have been some amendments, he said. How many amendments? A considerable number. I looked at him. The General Assembly, he said, carefully held an informal session. Went last night and the night before, and there were contributions submitted through the liaison office from member states and from a number of non-governmental channels, and at some point it became Owen. 41 drafts, he said. The document went through 41 drafts overnight. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. Show me, I said. He showed me. I read it standing in the corridor outside the chamber. My original document had been precise and legally sound and excellent. What I was now reading was none of those things. In the conventional sense, it contradicted itself twice in the 4th paragraph, it contained a clause in Section 3 that was technically a different legal argument than the clause immediately following it. Somewhere in the middle, a sentence had been inserted by the coalition of island nations that was so quietly furious it made me stop and read it 3 times. Near the end, in what had once been my carefully composed conclusion, someone had inserted a sentence that I was fairly certain scanned as a haiku if you read it slowly. I checked, it did, 17 syllables. Unintentional, perfect. It was a mess. It was also unmistakably the work of hundreds of people from every corner of the planet who had all put their hands on the same document and pulled it in their own direction and somehow produced something that was, underneath all the contradictions, one single clear thing. The same thing said 800 different ways. We are not yours to manage, we are ours. I folded it, put it under my arm, walked into the chamber. The room was full, screen snorts on. Every wall carried feeds that I knew were being mirrored to every broadcasting infrastructure on the planet. The Verk was present not on a screen in the room, standing near the far wall in the way it had of taking up exactly the space it occupied and no more. Philip Hart stood at the podium. He looked at me as I came in. I gave him the document. He looked down at it, then up at me. This is not what we finalized, he said quietly. It is what was submitted, I said, by every member state, 43 non-governmental organizations, and one livestock farmer from Iceland who turns out to have very precise thoughts about self-determination. Philip Hart looked at the document. He read it. He looked up. Something shifted in his face, not softening exactly, more like a man who had spent 30 days trying to hold a very complicated thing together and had just discovered that it had held itself. He stepped to the podium. The room went quiet. On every screen, every channel, every feed going out to every corner of the planet, the light went live. Philip Hart cleared his throat. To the Galactic Council, he said. From the people of Earth. He read the document. He read it as it was, contradictions and all. He read the section that argued two slightly different things in adjacent sentences. He read the Island Nations clause, which was the kind of quiet, precise fury that only comes from people who have had something taken before and recognize the shape of it coming again. He read the accidental haiku without knowing it was a haiku, and I found out later that 17 million people who received the broadcast in text form noticed it, and that it became, within 6 hours, the most printed thing since the invention of the printing press. He read the conclusion. We are aware of our history. We are not done with it. We decline your offer of management. We will continue to be ungovernable, contradictory, occasionally catastrophic, and entirely our own. If this constitutes a threat classification, you have correctly identified us. We suggest the Council update its models. The last sentence, which had been added by a retired school teacher in Nigeria at 2:00 in the morning on day 28, and which no one had removed through 41 subsequent drafts, read, "We are and have always been the ones who decide." Philip Hart lowered the document. The room was absolutely still. The Verk had not moved from its place. Near the far wall, it was looking at Philip Hart, then it turned and it looked at me. I did not look away. You understand, the Verk said, that The Council will not simply accept this, that there will be consequences to this decision that your species is not currently equipped to manage. Yes, I said. You understand that the 14 civilizations observing this planet will interpret this refusal as confirmation of your Tier 1 status, that it will not make your situation safer. Yes, I said. And you still choose this. I thought about 47 civilizations. Stable, peaceful, provided for, none of them recognizable to what they had once been. I thought about a place that had been called ungovernable, about what was left after it was managed, about the specific silence that settles over a thing when the part that argued and pushed and refused to be quiet has been carefully, peacefully removed. I thought about a 4-sentence statement in my pocket written by a government that had been erased twice and kept coming back, and about 600 million signatures on a document that said nothing except that they wanted to keep what was theirs. I thought about 3 nations pausing a war to deal with someone trying to tell them they could not have the war. I thought about a livestock farmer from Iceland who had apparently had opinions about sovereignty ready to go at a moment's notice. I thought about a marine biologist's single paragraph held up on signs in streets I had never visited, in languages I had never studied. I thought about 8 billion people who had not been asked what they wanted, discovering that they had a great deal to say about it. Yes, I said, we choose this. The Verk was still, then it said something I had not expected. 47 species, it said, in 60,000 years. Not one refused. It was not quite a threat, it was not quite a warning, it was something closer to genuine bafflement. The Verk, ancient and patient and vast, was looking at me the way you look at something that has done something outside the boundaries of your model. I know, I said, that is rather the point. The Verk looked at me for a long moment. Then it said, we will report to the Council. Tell them to update their models, I said. It left the same way it always left. No door, no sound. One moment present, the next moment not. The room held its breath for a second. Then someone began clapping. I am still not sure who started it. It spread quickly, the way things do when people have been holding something in for a very long time and are finally allowed to put it down. I did not clap, I stood still. I was thinking about what came next, because nothing had been resolved, not really. The Council had not accepted the refusal. There were 14 other civilizations watching. The 30-day deadline had passed, and we had shouted back into the dark, and we did not yet know what the dark was going to do with that. 3 of the suspended conflicts quietly resumed the following week. I read about it in my morning briefing and felt nothing about it except the specific tiredness of someone who expected that and had no remedy for it. The petition website crashed under the traffic it received in the hour after the broadcast. It came back online 6 hours later. By then, it had 100 million new signatures, which was either hopeful or irrelevant, and I had not yet decided which. The accidental haiku was printed on a poster, then on 40 kinds of posters, then on items I did not expect posters to be printed on. I received one in the mail from Owen 3 weeks later with a note that said, simply thought you should have this. The Council was silent for 19 days after the broadcast. No response, no follow-up. Transmission, no indication of what consequence or correction might mean and when it might arrive. Philip Hart came to my office on day 12. Of the silence, he sat across from me and looked at my paper wall, which I had not taken down. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I need more coffee," I said, "and probably a holiday. After this is over." "When is this over?" He did not answer that because neither of us knew that was the honest shape of where we were. We had refused something large, and we did not know what it would cost, and we would not know for a while, maybe a long while, and the world was going to have to sit inside that uncertainty and keep being itself. Regardless, that is not the tidy ending. I know that. I'm a person who works in diplomacy, and I know that stories with tidy endings are usually covering for something that did not resolve cleanly. This one did not resolve cleanly. What it did was this: 8 billion people were asked to give up the right to decide for themselves, and they said no. In 41 drafts, in 4 sentences, in a 600 million signature petition that asked for nothing except to keep what was already theirs, in a joint statement from nations at war, in a livestock farmer's contribution to a legal document at 2:00 in the morning, in every way that 8 billion people know how to say a thing they mean. I went back to my window that night. Geneva below lit from end to end. Lake doubled every light. I took the folded paper out of my pocket, read it one more time. 4 sentences, a small nation twice. Erased, still here. I put it back. I looked at all those lights reflected in the water, and I let myself feel the thing I had been not feeling for 30 days. The thing I had been approaching carefully, like a feral animal, afraid of what would happen if I got close to it, and it turned out to be smaller than I thought, or larger. It was not small. It was not simple either, and it did not come with any guarantees, and it sat in my chest like something warm that I was not accustomed to carrying. I had a name for it now. I had had a name for it for a while. I had been choosing not to use it, the way you choose not to look directly at something you are afraid might disappear if you acknowledge it. I looked at the lights. I said the word very quietly to the window. Then I went to find better coffee. There was still work to do. There would always be work to do. That I had decided was not a problem. That was the point.